Hi everyone, this is Gary Berman, host of the Cyber Hero Adventure Show, coming to you from Washington, D.C. I'm here with a very, very special guest today for more of an in-depth briefing, Seth Spergel. He's the Managing Director of Merlin Ventures. Seth, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gary. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. We spoke recently and you told me a little bit about your amazing origin story. My audience is very interested in origin stories,
Yep.
Which we get from comic creation. Like what was Spider-Man's motivation? And
Yes.
So let's jump into that. Maybe you can
Sure.
share with our audience a little bit about your origin story and how you got here.
Sure. So I think what we talked about when you and I spoke last week was really more about my origin story as it relates to my time at In-Q-Tel, the venture capital fund that was created originally by the CIA and now sort of serves the whole U.S. intelligence community. But given the superhero background of the origin story, maybe we should start at the job before that. So prior to that, I was actually at a toy company that created a lot of superhero-related toys. There's a company
Right.
called Think Geek that created geeky toys and clothing. So I had been at IBM originally out of college, started as a developer, eventually moved into a sales manager role, realized I really did not want to be a sales manager at IBM anymore, and had a former colleague of mine from IBM who had gone over to this company called Think Geek to be their VP of engineering, so running their e-commerce platform.
Wow.
And he wanted to move on. He called me and said, hey, I'm looking to backfill myself. Would you like this job? And like any good geek, I said, I would love to come work at a toy company and play all day. Turns out you had to do a little bit of work too, but it was a lot of fun for a couple of years. And then when that came to an end through some interesting decisions by investors in the company, I had another former colleague who I had worked with at IBM, who is now at In-Q-Tel, which is a VC that was created in 1999, and the impetus for it was George Tenet at the time was director of the CIA, and he realized that where historically a lot of the innovation had been funded by government labs, over a period of time that had really shifted to private industry doing
Right.
most of the innovation in the world. And the government, especially the intelligence community, really struggled to figure out how to work with those early stage startups. And so Tenet's idea was, what if we could create a VC firm that was explicitly tasked with helping bring early stage technology into the intelligence community.
Wow.
Right, and so the idea was, let's go find these technologies that help solve a problem, right? Whether it's dealing with big data or coming up with interesting new devices, right? Like James Bond type devices, and that's
Wow.
where the name In-Q-Tel, right? Q comes from the James Bond piece of it. And so this VC firm was created, and the idea was go find those companies, invest in them as a VC because startups know how to work with VCs, and be that bridge to help bring them into the government, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, so the idea was, if you find a company that's doing some really interesting analytics, but the government has a very proprietary file format, for instance, we would invest in them, and as part of that investment, help fund their development of a feature to support that files format.
So if you can say, to an audience, like how many investments or how would you dimensionalize, that initiative?
They are one of the more prolific strategic investors out there, and
Wow.
I guess for folks that don't necessarily understand the difference between a strategic investor and a more traditional VC, because I know I didn't when I first started, right? A traditional VC is really looking at it from the perspective of financial return, right?
Right.
You're investing in a company
Yeah.
because you think this company is going to be the next Google or Facebook. A strategic investor may look at that, but also has other initiatives driving it, right? And in the case of In-Q-Tel, it was far less about financial returns. In fact, In-Q-Tel is a nonprofit. It was a lot more about, does this help move the mission forward?
Right.
And so that was really our selector for, how do we find the right companies, is does this solve a problem that the intelligence community is dealing with? And then in terms of numbers, right, it really varies by year, but I don't know exactly how many they're publishing they're doing right now, right? Not every investment they do is published, but it's a sizable, dozens of investments.
We'll leave it
per
at
year.
that.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
Wow, I mean that is the most original origin story that I think I've heard.
Well, again, I didn't create InQtel. It was there when I got
No,
there.
no, I get that. Can you say how long you were there?
Yeah, I was there for 5 years, from 2013 to 2018.
Wow, I mean that's substantial. And
Yep.
and so now you have Merlin Ventures. Maybe you can share with our audience a little bit about your mission and what you're looking to do here in the United States.
Yeah,
or in abroad.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been there at InQtel for 5 years, and in 2018, I got approached by, I had a friend that worked at this company called Merlin, and Merlin, not the VC which we created after I joined, but Merlin Cyber, this company that they were working at, is a now 26-year-old company that works in the US federal space.
Wow.
So the business model there is really helping established cybersecurity companies tackle and grow the federal market, right? So if you look at, one of our closest partners is CyberArk, right? We work with them very closely to grow their federal business, help them with larger enterprise types of deals, right? And really make sure they're successful there. And there was a thought of, this is great, we're working with all these established companies, but there's all these, much like, the InQtel sort of epiphany of there's all these companies out there that can provide a lot more value. We at Merlin had the same, I can't say we, I wasn't there yet. Merlin leadership had the same sort of thought of, what if we stood up a venture arm to go find that next generation of companies that's going to really change the game in the federal market? Could we invest in them, help them grow, and then eventually bring them into the federal market, leveraging the resources we have? So I joined in late 2018. I guess we formally stood up Merlin Ventures in 2019. And when we first started out, it was really just me investing from the Washington, D.C. area, right? And we had a somewhat limited reach, right? We ended up doing some investments in the US market, and we also ended up doing some in Israel, not necessarily as a strategic decision, but it just sort of worked out that way. And we saw we had a couple of challenges, right? Being based in the DC area, it was really hard for me to navigate any of those ecosystems, right?
So not being in Silicon Valley or wherever.
Right. You want to be where the startups are, because so much of it is based on the background of the founders and the reputation of the company, right? And so if you're not there and can't get close to that, A, you're not hearing about the deals until everybody else has already looked at them and passed over them, and B, you're making not the best decisions, right? So it can be difficult. But we got lucky in that in I guess 2019, 2020, we got introduced to a very small micro fund in Israel called Today Ventures. And our CEO, David, became an LP, an investor in that fund. And they had an interesting background story. So this is another good origin story for you.
Okay.
So my now partner in Israel, Shai, he had been a serial entrepreneur, and after he sold his last company, went to work for this company called Encode, that is a product design firm that had helped him when he was at a startup.
Right.
And at Encode, they worked with a lot of the early stage Israeli startups to help them really design their products, design their interfaces. And they were really good at it. And so a few years later, when by the time we got to know Shai, a lot of the founders that they had helped out originally were now the CEOs of unicorns in Israel, right? So if you look at companies like CyberReason, Aqua, right? Like they help with those companies. And so after doing this for a while, Shai actually got approached by a friend at TLV Partners, Rona Segev, who said to him, why don't you come work with us here? And he made the decision that he wanted to do his own thing, right? And so Rona mentored him a bit and helped him stand up this new fund called Today Ventures, and introduced him to some folks who eventually became LPs. And the idea was Today Ventures could invest in the deal flow coming out of Encode. So because of that model, where Shai knew a lot of these really established entrepreneurs in Israel and had this connection to Encode, he had amazing deal flow, right? He knew about these startups. The challenge he had was he had a $1.5 million fund in a environment where there were a number of other VCs competing for deals. And so it was very hard to sort of get above the noise there. And so we got to talking, right? And Merlin sort of had the opposite problem. We were getting above the noise because we come into Israel with this story of, we help you tackle the US government market, right? And if you think about the background of most Israeli entrepreneurs, right? Military service is compulsory there. They've all worked in the government, essentially.
Right.
And their first thought is, I want to go sell to the US government. Specifically, I want to go sell to the CIA and NSA, right? Which we have to tell them is not the right thing for a foreign founder to try to do. But there's a good chunk of the US government market that that is a lot more open to working with foreign technology, specifically the civilian side of the market, where we have historically focused. So that message was really resonating in Israel, but we didn't know how to filter through all the different companies in that market or necessarily find them at the right stage.
Yep.
Shy did, right? So what we ended up doing was partnering, and Merlin became the largest investor in that Today Ventures fund, right? We set up a new iteration of that was handed off sort of day-to-day operations to his partners, and Shai became our managing partner for Merlin Ventures in Tel Aviv. And so we've spent the last 3 years really focusing on building up our presence over there, because we've realized now that we have a much larger differentiation over there, right? And can really stand out, and we've quickly become one of the top cyber VCs in Israel as a result. So, where we are today is we have a team of 4 people over there. We focus on very early stage, typically seed or even pre-seed, occasionally A.
All in cybersecurity?
All in cybersecurity.
And so as we know, cybersecurity encompasses a lot. Are there particular verticals? I guess federal is what you're saying. But are there certain, sort of horizontal?
Well, so I should clarify 2 things, right? When we say federal, we're looking for federal as something we can use to add value to our portfolio companies. We're not looking for companies that only sell into the federal market. We're not looking for GovTech.
Okay, I understand.
Right, so we're looking for companies that are commercially focused and have relevance to larger enterprises, which happens to include government. And the idea is we can leverage our sister company to sort of put our thumb on the scale and help drive sales for them.
I understand.
On the government side. But really our focus is on a company that can be commercially successful standalone without the government business.
And is there some size of investment, or your early seed investors?
We're early, right? So the investments are typically not huge. But
like, what is that? Like $1 million? Or
in that ballpark, right? $500,000 to $2.5 million, right? And it's varied, right? We've done.
I understand.
We've done much larger deals. We've done smaller deals.
Yeah.
But that's generally sort of the space we like to play in. Typically, I'd say at least $1 million. And I should also add we're raising a new fund now, so those numbers will be going up hopefully in the not too distant future. But to your question on cybersecurity and sort of the domains of that. I'd say we're focused on cybersecurity, but we have a broad definition of cybersecurity, right? So if there are things that are adjacent, think infrastructure or networking or developer tools that have a play related to cybersecurity, or even analytic tools that may relate to cyber intelligence or things like that, those are a fair game from our perspective. We don't really have. There are certainly areas we are actively looking at right now, identity, cloud security, things like that. But I wouldn't say we're constrained in terms of we're only looking for these particular categories right now. We're looking for anything that we think is going to be relevant.
So you're in a competitive environment. What is your assessment of the state of VC and M&A, in the cybersecurity ecosystem? How do you assess that at the moment?
So if you think about where we are just timeline-wise, right? We had this massive explosion in valuations that kind of peaked in mid-2022, right? And so now we're approaching 18 months out from that, right? Where money dried up, valuations became much smaller, interest rates have gone up. And so a lot of companies that may have raised under those early conditions are now running to the end of their runway. And the stronger ones are typically able to raise, right? And we see a lot of, if you're familiar with like a safe round, where it's a simple agreement for future equity. It basically allows an investor to put money into a company without putting a lot of terms around it, and says, we'll figure out the value of this investment later, right? So we see a lot of that where companies don't want to set a specific value for their rounds right now, because there's a good chance if they set a value, it'll be lower than the last one they raised at. But they can typically get investors to put money in if they've got some progress to show, so they can keep going and get to the place where the valuations are back in the right spot. Well,
just forgive the interruption, but you're something else just triggered from a recent interview I did with someone else in M&A. This is a very large sort of topic about the nexus of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. How do you see that, and from an investment standpoint?
Yeah, if you look at every presentation every cybersecurity company has given for the last 10 years, right? Slide number 2 is always, the challenge we face is there aren't enough cybersecurity professionals to deal with these, and so we try to make it better, right?
That's right.
And so we've been trying to build automation for the last 10 years. We've been building automation tools for the last 10 years, right? And now we're at a level where we can start to allow even greater levels of automation, right, and even greater levels of scale for the types of data we can work with because of that artificial intelligence. So, I don't necessarily know like what are the perfect products to develop with AI.
Right.
We certainly talk to a lot of companies that say they figured it out, but it does, give us a significant way of addressing that talent gap and taking a lot of the processes and other sorts of things that maybe less experienced, more junior type of people have been doing, and pushing that off to a system to do, and let the actual intelligent people focus on the harder tasks. Right.
Well, I mentioned you just very briefly, but one of the reasons that I'm here at the MSSP conference in Washington is to listen and learn about that ecosystem.
Yep.
And one of the recurring things that I've heard is this notion of high-level talent.
Yep.
So someone could just hang out, a shingle and say, I'm a CISO, or I'm a fractional or virtual,
Yep.
CISO, and how do you know that? I mean, what are the criteria, and how does someone, assess that?
Yep.
And so one of the things that we're just starting to listen and learn about and are considering doing is adding a virtual CISO component to the Cyber Hero network.
Yep.
Where individual consultants or people who want to be part of a network or supplement their income or things like that. Maybe they don't like business development, they want to focus on technical or whatever, can have, a community
right.
Of fractional CISOs. What do you think about that as it relates to talent?
Yeah, I think we've seen that in a lot of situations, right, where companies, especially smaller companies that don't have the resources to hire a full-time CISO, have a very obvious gap, right? They need somebody that can guide them on security decisions. And I think this is where AI potentially does open up the ability for a single CISO to even serve more companies than they could have historically, right? In fact, we have a company in our portfolio called Tamnoon that is leveraging AI to provide an MSSP service for CSPM and CNAP platforms. So the idea is, if you look at platforms like Wiz and Orca and Prisma, right, they've all gotten so broad and new features keep getting added that you now need a small army of cybersecurity professionals to actually leverage them, keep them properly configured and working,
right.
and also respond to the findings they have. And so you have a couple options there, right? You can stand up a team of 10 people to manage your CSPM platform, or you can outsource it to an MSSP to manage for you, who historically would have also had to dedicate 10 people to figuring it out. The idea behind Tamnoon is they've built an AI platform that allows a single person to manage probably in the ballpark of 10 or so clients. So really flipping that equation around, right? Where
would these be like small to mid-sized clients? Is that
it could be? It could also even be larger clients, right?
You should introduce them to us, and maybe there's some synergy or something.
Happy to do that, but but I think that's where we see some really interesting stuff, right? That intersection of AI and humans working together to allow for much greater scale of what we could have historically done.
Well said. As we're beginning to wrap up, is there anything else you'd like our audience to know?
I think our biggest challenge right now is we've had tremendous success in terms of building up our capabilities to find and grow these companies that are doing amazingly well. And even though we're early stage, we're already seeing you were asking about M&A, some of the M&A sniffing around our companies with Palo, according to news releases. I haven't confirmed one way or the other, but looking at two of our companies just in the last month, Dig and Talon. But despite that success, I think we're relatively unknown in the U.S. And so my challenge for this year is really to get our name out there, right? And so we're just trying to let people know that if they're looking for a partner that can help them navigate that ecosystem, right, of just all the talent coming out of Israel, whether it's founders here in the U.S. or founders and talent still over there. But I think we have a very unique position as a U.S. fund with deep ties over there, right? And so, one of the things we've worked on over the last few years is working actually very closely with the Israeli embassy to build out a network of, at this point, almost 200 or so CISOs and other security leaders in the U.S. that have an interest in just staying on top of that emerging technology. And we have conversations with them to help keep them on top of not our portfolio, but just what's coming out of the ecosystem as a whole, right? And I think as we expand that and just continue to work with the U.S. ecosystem, right, I'm hopeful that we'll get to the same place in the U.S. that we've gotten to in Israel so quickly.
Wow, that's cool. And how does our audience get more information about Merlin Ventures?
They can always shoot me an email, so you can just send an email to, we'll give the easy alias, just use Seth at merlin.vc, and we can connect them with the right folks on our team.
And so on behalf of a grateful digital universe, thanks for who you are and what you do, and most importantly, why you do it. And to our audience, stay tuned for more, and we'll see you soon.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.